in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today we will be discussing some verbs that have similar meanings but different uses and contexts in the additional verbs Spanish webinar. My name is Dan and my colleague Zach is here to answer any questions you may have throughout or at the end of the webinar, so please send them in at any time. If you do need to contact us with any questions about your program or your course, you have some options on the slide right now. If you do have questions today, you can send them in the area you see at the bottom of this slide. In today's webinar, we will discuss three groups of verbs, as you can see here, ser and estar, saber and conocer, and tener and haber. We'll also discuss what we call obligation phrases using the three verbs tener, deber, and ir, and show you some practice sentences as well. First, we will begin with ser and estar. Both of these verbs share a common meaning, to be, but have different uses and context in Spanish, and they are not interchangeable. And their uses are, context dependent. As you can see, typically the verb ser is used with more permanent contexts, such as characteristics or traits, time, as in telling time, and nationality or origin, where someone comes from. And estar is used in a more temporary context, such as emotions or feelings, the location of someone or something, and conditions of things. So keep in mind, ser more permanent, estar more temporary, things that can change from minute to minute, whereas ser, those things really can't change from minute to minute, except for time, but time is always looked at as a permanent thing in Spanish. That time down to the very second will never occur again on that date in the future, so on and so forth. Okay, on this slide we're going to review a little bit and show you the present indicative tense forms and conjugations of these two verbs. They're both irregular verbs. As you can see in their charts, first singular for ser begins with soy. First singular for estar begins with estoy. You should probably recognize those, or if not, become familiar with them. Very important verbs, and they will come up quite often throughout your course. And there are some example sentences at the bottom. First one dealing with nationality, stating that I am American. Ser deals with nationality. It's a permanent thing. Your citizenship can change, but your nationality is not going to change. And then the second one, the question asks, are you at the supermarket? I'm looking for, or someone's looking for your current location. And that location can change, so you have to use a star. You can be at the supermarket, but you can leave. You can then be in your car. You can be at home. So that will change from minute to minute, etc. Okay, so keep those conjugations in mind. Obviously, there are other tenses to be familiar with, but for the sake of this webinar, we're focusing strictly on present indicative tense alone. Okay, now we're going to transition and discuss saber and conocer, the two verbs that mean to know, but also have different uses and contexts in Spanish, and again, are not interchangeable. You cannot use one in place of the other. And as you notice there, saber would be used, to state fact or general information about someone or something, or when stating knowing how to do something. For instance, I know how to speak Spanish. All right. In the know-how context, saber will always conjugate to agree with the subject, and the verb that someone knows how to do, speaking in this case, would stay in its infinitive form. So you're not going to have two conjugations back to back. First is conjugated, second is the infinitive, meaning it has the AR, the ER, or the IR ending still attached to it. And then to use conocer in Spanish, all right, we would look at contexts such as being familiar with or acquainted with a person, a place, or a thing. So if you were to say, I know him, conocer, as opposed to, I know that his name is Tom, that would be saber. Just because you know his name doesn't mean you know him personally. Okay, if you're familiar with a place, if you said, I am familiar with New York City, right, I've been there many times, I used to live there, conocer. But if you want to say that, I know that, Brooklyn is one of the boroughs of New York City, then that's a fact. You would use saber in that case. Doesn't mean you necessarily know Brooklyn very well, haven't been there, just know something about it. And that goes for things as well. If you're familiar with, let's say an iPad or an iPhone, something like that, you know it, you can use it properly, you've had it for quite some time, you would use conocer. But if you just strictly said that I know that phone right there is an iPhone, then you would use saber in that case. So very sensitive depending on the wording, but definitely good to be able to differentiate between the two and how they're used respectively. Okay, so here we'll take a look at, again, the present indicative tense conjugations of these two verbs. They're also irregular, and they're only irregular in first person singular. Notice the Z coming into play in conocer's first singular form, and that accented E in saber's first singular form. Okay, so good conjugation to be familiar with again. Obviously other tenses exist, but like I said earlier, we're strictly focusing on present indicative for this webinar. And then you see some present tense examples down below. First one, using conocer to say that you are familiar with, you're friends with, an American person, as opposed to the second one where you just are stating the fact that you know that he is American. Might not know him necessarily, not from that sentence at least, so saber has to be used in that case. And then the third one shows one of the how-to examples as we mentioned previously. The verb sabe is conjugated to agree with he, the subject, and the second verb stays in the infinitive form with the IR attached. The verb that is known, how to do, or the verb somebody knows how to do, does not conjugate. So first one conjugates, sabe, second stays in the infinitive form. Okay, should not have two conjugations back to back. Okay, so keep those conjugations in mind up top. All right, and again, another topic that you'll see come up quite often in your course. As far as the next slide, this is our last group of verbs before we get into the obligation phrases. Okay, and these two, tener and haber, also share that common meaning. They both mean to have. Again, they also have different uses and contexts and are not interchangeable in Spanish. So tener is used more for possession. Now, if you were to say something like, I have, many pairs of sneakers. I own them. I possess them. Okay, but haber is used a little bit differently. Okay, usually it has to do with the content of something or some place. If I was to say that there are many pairs of sneakers in my closet, the closet, contains the sneakers. It doesn't really possess them. The sneakers don't belong to them. That's just where they exist, quote unquote. Okay, where they are. So haber would be used in that case in a non, possession context. Okay, so good differentiation to be mindful of there. And here, again, as we have been doing for the other sets of verbs, where we look at their present indicative forms or conjugations. Okay, tener at the top, tengo, I have, tienes, you have, so on and so forth, in terms of ownership or possession. And then the second conjugation here for haber, that really won't be used, that conjugation, they won't be used standing alone. They would need to have a second verb after them in more of a compound tense context. But the key form of haber that is very important for the time being, at least, is down below in that last note, the word I, H-A-Y. It's another present form of haber, and as we said, I think on the last slide, it can translate as there is or there are in a sentence context, or is there or are there in a question context. So that one word has 4 different translations. And that's the more common. That's the one you'll probably be using a little bit more for now in the early parts of the program or course. And then that conjugation a, as, a, amos, and am will come into play as you approach things like compound tenses, present perfect, past perfect tense, etc., etc. All right, and here are a few examples using tener and haber. The first one, which was mentioned, but I didn't talk about it yet on the from the previous slide. We'll get to it here in a few moments. Is from that obligation phrase, something that has to be done. So I have to study. Okay, you would use tener in that case, never haber. The second example, the fact that they have or own 3 dogs and 2 cats. Those animals are in their possession or under their ownership. So you would use tener in that case as well. But if you were to just say something like there are 3 dogs and 2 cats maybe in that household, then haber would be the verb to choose there, and I would be the specific form of it necessary to fit that context. Okay, so just keep in mind, if you hear that combination of there is, there are, is, there are, there, you know you would use haber, never tener. And if it's just I have, or you have, or they have, etc., then tener is the better choice. Okay, and then building off that first example, we'll talk about the obligation phrases quickly. All right, there are 3, including tener, right, verbs that are used in Spanish to express obligation, and certain phrases should express their respective actions, that should say. Okay, so the first of the 3 obligation phrases, tener plus que plus an infinitive, describes something that someone has to do, like we saw on the previous slide. Deber plus an infinitive describes something that should or must be done. And then ir plus a plus an infinitive finally describes something that is going to be done. And there are a couple more examples there in addition to the one we saw on the previous slide. The second one using deber. Right, deber conjugates regularly in the present indicative, so it would be debo, debes, debe, debemos, and deben. And that sentence, as you can see, translates as you should or you must watch the movie. And then ir is an irregular verb in the present tense. Its conjugation begins with voy and it goes on to vas, va, vamos, and van. This particular sentence, as you see there, translates to say, I am going to learn Spanish. Okay, and that one word voy can take on the am going. No need for present progressive with that verb. Okay, so that will conclude today's webinar. All right, we thank you for your attention, and if you do have any questions, you can send them to us at this time, or you can follow up with us if you do need help. Reach out to us via phone, email, chat, text, or scheduling an appointment. All right, Zach and I wish you buena suerte, good luck in your course, and thank you for paying attention. Have a good day.